What is happening, y'all? Cowboy here, and welcome to my review of Monster Hunter Wilds. Now, as of now, this review is based off of, let's see, 126 hours played. I am HR 134, playing everything on PC, of course. So I got quite a lot of time in the game, and I will say outright, you know, if you've followed the channel before, you know I'm a huge Monster Hunter fan. I'm probably one of the biggest Monster Hunter glazers. And this game is an easy 5 out of 5 for me. With that being said, there are definitely a lot of criticisms that I have, but at the end of the day, I don't think any of those detract enough from the experience to bring this lower. I've had an absolute great time with this game, and I can't wait for, you know, the title updates and the inevitable Master Rank expansion. But with all that being said, let's jump in. This review will be spoiler-free. We're not going to be going into story details or showing off stuff that hasn't been shown off in the previous trailers and whatnot. But either way, let's jump into it. And the first thing I want to talk about is the general gameplay loop, because at the end of the day, that's what we play Monster Hunter for. I will say from a gameplay perspective, overall, I think it's probably the best Monster Hunter has ever been. We have a lot of the quality of life changes that we got in both World and then in Rise. And so overall, things are pretty nice in terms of like just the overall hunt and how the hunt feels, and, you know, going around the map and exploring the world. The changes to combat with things like let me dodge that. Changes to combat, things like the focus mode and whatnot. I definitely think those are welcome additions that'll make the game a lot more beginner friendly as well. But at the same time, I do think they maybe went a little bit overboard in terms of how beginner friendly it is. And to clarify, so low rank has always been essentially a tutorial for Monster Hunter events, and it is very, very much that case now. So much so that, you know, even in low rank, until I got up to like the very end of low rank, there was no chance of carding. I never really felt at risk. And on average, I'd say my hunts were coming in under 10 minutes. And then, you know, as I got into high rank, things started taking a little bit longer. And then as I ended up, you know, finally getting a full endgame armor set, the overall hunt times started to get back down to where, you know, if I'm taking over 10 minutes on a hunt, I'm like, oh, something's wrong with my build, because it's quite easy now, to be honest. So while I do really like the overall gameplay and just how smooth everything is, I will say the overall difficulty, I think, is a little bit too easy. Now, at the same time, I think part of that might just be the fact that the most recent experience that I had with Monster Hunter was obviously going through a fresh Iceborne playthrough and doing Master Rank. And, you know, when you're playing Master Rank or G Rank, whatever you want to call it, obviously there is a higher expectation of difficulty than what you get with the base game. So it might be a little bit of just my expectations not exactly being where they should be, but despite that, I do think there are a lot of things that really make it easier, like what you just saw there. Anytime we get knocked down, our secret can instantly pick us on up. On top of that, the Palico is insanely good. Just to put it in perspective, you know, in World, we had the ability to have our Palico either heal us or put out a shield, or instead he could taunt the monster or use his little you know, his little damage device, and our Palico actually gets all of that stuff now. So your Palico is healing you, he's rezzing you, he's taunting, he's flash caging, he's trapping. It's absolutely wild. So much so that I will say, if you are a veteran of Monster Hunter and you want to give yourself a harder challenge, I would suggest honestly just leaving the Palico at camp. And for the sake of you know, the secret, I'd suggest not using the secret to recover in combat, because it does make the combat a lot easier than probably any prior Monster Hunter experience you've had. But despite that, I mean, the game is still really fun, and I do think this kind of falls into the realm of, like, you know, you control the buttons you press. Like I said, these are features that I can turn off to make the difficulty harder, but they are very nice quality of life, and then, you know, it's kind of nice just to have that more relaxed hunt at times. Now, with that in mind, once you get up into high rank and you start doing things like the tempered monsters, which were recently revealed, I think veterans of the franchise will certainly feel closer to home with the content like that. Right now, this is just a low rank hunt. They didn't want us to show off the high rank footage and the high rank gear and whatnot, so we're just doing a low rank hunt against a new Udra. This is with low rank gear. Like, I think it's like a rank 3 glaive I got going on here. But either way, just know going into the gameplay that, especially if you are a veteran of the franchise, it will absolutely feel easier to you. Now, moving on from there, I do want to take a second to talk about the story, because this is something that is relatively new on the front of Monster Hunter. And what I'm talking about is, when I think of Monster Hunter, I don't think anybody really thinks the campaign. You think about the hunt. And that's actually changed here. They have the low rank is like a fully fledged campaign, even more so than what it was in World. It has a full story going on with it. And, there's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of parts where it's very on the rails. And so I think, especially veteran hunters of the franchise, you'll feel a little bit off experiencing that. But for newcomers that are just trying to get into the Monster Hunter franchise for the first time, I do think that will be a very welcome change and make the franchise a lot more approachable for them. In terms of hours, out of the 120 whatever hours that I have, I'd say my low rank experience was probably under 15, and all the other hours came from high rank. So it is true Monster Hunter in the sense that, like, once the game gets going, you're going to have plenty of content. But, just know that we do have a more structured story in the low rank environment. Whether you're going to enjoy that story, that's going to be, very much an interesting point that I think. I enjoyed the story, but I do think the people that are big lore geeks when it comes to Monster Hunter are going to have some thoughts. I don't want to make any spoilers, but there are certainly some, we'll call them interesting revelations that we get out of the story that I think people probably will not see coming. And they're things that I think would have a pretty big impact on kind of the lore of Monster Hunter as we know it. So I'll be curious to see the responses as more veterans of the franchise get a chance to experience it. But overall, I did enjoy the story, and we obviously have the post-game high rank activities, and the story continues there, very similar to how things worked in World. Moving on from there, though, talking about the world design a little bit, and this is where I think the game really begins to shine, because, as opposed to the model we had in World, where we would essentially, we'd start off at our main hub, we would do whatever, pick a quest, we'd eat, we'd get our items, we'd go on the hunt. Now it's a lot more just you're in the world, and especially once you get into high rank, this loop is further refined, and I'll talk about that in a second. But so as we pick up quests, a lot of those quests, especially in low rank, will start with you just like, you're going out in the world, you discover a monster, a hunt goes down. But especially because we don't have this central hub anymore, and we just have little camps in every area, there's a lot more time that's spent out in the environment, looking for monsters, going from one area to another. And especially if I think about how World approached it, where you spent your first couple hours just in the ancient forest, we actually go to the second zone relatively quick, and then the third zone relatively quick. And so there's a lot more time spent progressing through the game and visiting new areas and kind of unlocking the various zones. And the game has a big focus on the interactivity in those zones and how the whole world ties together. Whereas, in World, it was a lot more structured in the sense of you did chapter 1, over to the next place. You did chapter 2, over to the next place. And I do think that's something I really like. This especially comes to life in the endgame, as I mentioned a second ago, in the form of the investigations. Now, just to show, well, before this guy dies, I'll pull up the map real fast. Now, this is low rank, and so we don't have investigations. Let me go ahead and actually get on my mount while I'm talking about this. You calm down, Udra. But so the idea here is, as you're going around the world, you're going to pull up your map, and we can see all the active monsters that are currently on the map. And once you're into high rank, these monsters will offer additional rewards that you can get. Now, you can just click it and add it as an investigation, or you can hunt it beforehand and then add it as an investigation. But as the map progresses through the various seasons and the various time of day, whether it's going to be fallow or plenty or inclemency, things are going to change. Different monsters are going to spawn, different rewards are going to spawn. There's going to be double hunts where you can get tons and tons of rewards out of them, including both decorations as well as parts to make something known as Ardian weapons, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's just a really cool concept where, in World, it felt very much like, okay, I'm going on my hunt, time to go on my hunt. And now you actively spend a lot more time out in the world deciding what you're going to hunt or seeing stuff pop up on the map. And even if you're trying to get something in particular to spawn, you actually can do that by just changing the time of day or changing the season and then seeing, okay, what's changed on the map? What's up now that I can go after? And that's something that I think is really cool because it makes the world feel a lot more alive. It really makes it feel like you're spending more time in the world, in the environment, looking for things to do. And, sometimes you'll take down a target and then another target pops up and you're like, ooh, going after this guy. So overall, the world design and how that ties into the flow of the hunt, I think that's probably one of the things I've enjoyed the most about this game, as opposed to previous entries in the franchise that are a lot more localized around the hub and hub based. Now, I don't want to spend too much time talking about the endgame loop, because I do have limited time to fit into this one video, but I will say the endgame loop has been a lot of fun. And this kind of ties directly into that world design approach, but being able to find various monsters on the map and go off those tempered hunts. Some tempered hunts are going to offer more materials for Ardian weapons, which are these customized weapons you can create, kind of similar to the Safi Jiva weapons that we had in Iceborne, and that's something that I really like. In some cases, they were extremely good. In other cases, the craftable weapons you would make from monsters were either competitive or better. It just really depends on the weapon you're doing, but it really just added more variety. And one of the things I really enjoyed about the Ardian system is, let's say you've played one weapon for pretty much the majority of your hunts, and then you're like, you know what, I think I'd like to try out dual blades. Dual blades sound really cool, but you obviously don't want to go through crafting an entire dual blade tree. Well, you can just craft an Ardian dual blade and then roll with it, and you suddenly have a max rank weapon that has the element you were looking for or the status you were looking for, and it's very easy to just get things up and running. And that's something that I found really cool, just as somebody that does like to play a lot of weapons. Even if you're just experimenting with stuff, that makes it extremely approachable in a way that we really haven't had up until now in the franchise. In addition to that, the overall deco grind, I will say, is basically a dream compared to what we had in World. There are certain investigation hunts on the map which will literally just pump out decos for you, and overall just the deco experience in general is a lot better, I feel now. It doesn't feel like I'm constantly chasing after a specific attack boost deco, and the overall system in general, they've swapped decos to be split between attack decos and weapon decos. And so while you can still make builds that are very much focused around attack, you pretty much always are going to have room for some kind of utility now. And I think that does provide a very nice change in terms of the build crafting, and it allows players a little bit more flexibility, especially when you couple this with the fact that the difficulty overall isn't as difficult as what we had in Iceborne, for example. I think it's also more flexible in the sense that you're not like, oh, I gotta have all attack stuff. You're able to fit in a lot more flexible stuff. And even the set that I find myself using the most in endgame content, while it does have plenty of attack options on it, it also has some extremely good utility skills. So things like evade window, things like earplugs, things like divine blessing, these are going to be a lot more common, and I think that's actually something that's really good for the overall health of the game and getting players to move away from the ideology of, you have to have max rank attack, you have to have attack, because it is kind of a pervasive thing in the Monster Hunter scene, and so it'll be nice that players will finally have more flexibility. Moving on to the graphics, obviously things are going to be a little bit biased here because I am playing on PC. I have a 4090. In terms of graphics, this is with everything cranked up. I do have frame gen off because of some issues that I have with that, which I'll detail a little bit later once we talk about bugs and performance. But I think the graphics absolutely look beautiful in this. I know talking to some other people, I've heard there's some issues with TAA and kind of giving things this overall blurriness. Just to go over into my options real fast, I am, NVIDIA DLSS, pretty much everything is set to high except for mesh quality, which we'll also talk about that in the bug section. But we're in 4K, low latency mode, capped at 144 frames. On average with the 4090, I'd say I was right around 80 to 90 FPS. With frame gen, I would get over 100, but frame gen was giving me an issue, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But in general, I think the graphics looks absolutely beautiful here. I've heard some people say, oh no, the graphics are worse than World. No, I vehemently disagree with that. The level of detail that we have on the maps right now is so much higher than we had on World. And especially once you really get into the environment and you start looking around, I mean, the facts are at any given time, these maps have 5 to 6 different monsters on them, tons of endemic life, tons of small monsters, and there's so much more going on in the map that just makes it a lot more alive than previous maps. And that's something that I've really come to appreciate the more time that I've spent with the game. Briefly, just to talk about audio. Audio is exactly what you'd expect out of a Monster Hunter game. The sound effects are very crisp, the monster noises are distinct, the music that plays on certain hunts and the ones that are a lot more memorable obviously pop out. Audio was a clean sweep here. I had no issues with audio. It's exactly what I would expect from Monster Hunter. Speaking to length and price, this is another area where I think it's a clear win. Like I said, I'm over 120 hours played at this point. I plan on still doing tons of additional high rank content on stream. I plan on doing an additional playthrough on stream. There is absolutely no question about whether you will get your money's worth out of this game. It's Monster Hunter. And then on top of that, I think it's important to remember that we also have all the free title updates coming. We're going to get an inevitable expansion, even though that will be paid. But the point is, when it comes to Monster Hunter, like, you will absolutely get your money's worth. I think I had close to like 1,000 hours across my various playthroughs with World and Iceborne, and probably also something similar to that with Rise and Sunbreak. So when it comes to value, Monster Hunter absolutely has you covered. Moving on from there, though, I did want to take some time to talk about bugs and performance. Now, there were two distinct bugs that I encountered, and both of these actually had to do with some stuff in the options. The first being mesh quality. When I had this set to either high or highest, I had a mesh that would slip off of monsters and populate as just this giant triangle that was like having a seizure across your screen. It was incredibly distracting. I just kind of played through it for quite a while, but it would be like, I can see the triangle, now it disappears. I can see the triangle, and now it disappears. And it was very clearly something coming off of the monster. I do know 100% it's something with mesh. Capcom's obviously been informed of this. Hopefully that gets fixed up, but that was obviously very, very distracting. And then the other thing, I had a big issue with frame gen. Now, initially I was fine playing with frame gen. I was like, you know, it's more frames. I didn't feel I really created a latency disadvantage in terms of getting off things like offsets or perfect dodges. But anytime that I would try to tab out of the game with frame gen active, the game would end up crashing on me. And I don't know if this is something with my particular PC setup, but like if I had frame gen on and then I tabbed out of the game to like message somebody in Discord or whatever the case was, very frequently the game would crash outright. And that's something that was definitely pretty annoying, and that sort of eventually got me to just be like, all right, we're not playing with frame gen at all. This could be related to NVIDIA drivers. It could be related to just, you know, needing day one optimization. But regardless, those were by far the two biggest bugs that I encountered. Besides that, though, I'd say my experience was overall smooth. I didn't really have any other crashes outside of the frame gen related ones that I could think about, and the mesh related issue, but that was pretty irritating to deal with. And if you encounter that issue yourself, turn down the mesh setting like I did. I still think the game looks really nice even with that mesh setting turned off, but I did want to call that out. In terms of overall performance, this is an area where I think I'm obviously a little bit biased, being someone that has access to a 4090, because performance overall, I mean, getting 80 FPS plus at all times, I'm okay with that. To me, that's going to be solid performance. Getting to 100 plus with frame gen on, I'm overall happy with that. But I know most people don't have access to rigs that are of this caliber, and I do think the game could have better performance, especially given that, you know, visually, while I think this game does look better than World, I get that a lot of people are like, I ran World and I can't run this, and I absolutely understand that. And so to them, you know, well, I shouldn't say to them, but for them, I really hope that Capcom does take some more time and focus on the optimization of the game. I do think it can certainly get better, but just know that performance in general, I think it does run better than what we had in the demo, but on lower end rigs, you're still going to suffer. So if you're getting it, I would highly suggest you check it out and then, you know, play that 2-hour Steam window and see how it runs. If it runs good, great. If it doesn't, then, you know, at least you can return it and maybe come back later when things have been optimized. I'd also like to keep in mind that, you know, when it came to launch World and Iceborne on PC, they were also kind of a mess in terms of PC performance. And I don't know if it's just, you know, how this engine is implemented or if Capcom just needs to work on their optimization more. But regardless, I do think it's worth calling out. So all that being said, what are my final thoughts? At the end of the day, I love the game. It's definitely a bit easier in the initial approach than previous Monster Hunter entries, and on top of that, I do think that the low rank experience is going to be very different from what people are used to, but I can't deny how much fun I've been having. Like I said, I mean, you don't play something for 125 hours if you're not enjoying it. And on top of that, I've been having a blast doing multiplayer. I've been having a blast doing the SOS hunts and jumping in and hunting with other people and doing the higher end investigations. And it really has been a just tremendous time playing it. And at the end of the day, I think that's the thing that's most important to me when it comes to a game, is how much fun am I having? If I'm having fun, that matters for, you know, about 60% of my review score. But, you know, as you can see right here, I mean, That Lalabarina was killed in sub 5, and our gear right now is you know, rank 3 Espada, and then the Ray Dow armor. So like the difficulty is definitely going to be something that I think people are going to take some time adjusting to, especially in low rank, because it is baby's first Monster Hunter. But regardless, I love the game. I'm excited to play more, and you know, I hope to see you out there on the hunt.